Hey everybody, welcome again to another episode of the StoryDNA podcast. I should say videocast actually at this point, something cast. I am Kathy Klotz-Guest, and my co-conspirator in fun and partner in crime as always is Brian Carter. Hey Brian. And today we are very excited to be talking to Rebecca Stockley. She is the improv lady, improvlady.com. I've known her in the Bay Area improv community for years. She's phenomenal. She's a founding member of BATS Improv in San Francisco at Fort Mason. If you ever get a chance to stop on by, do so. So welcome to the videocast, Rebecca.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Brian.
Well, let's jump in. I was, before we went live, I was geeking out, because I usually do, about the intersection of storytelling and improv, and one of the real treats about having Rebecca on is through the lens of stage narrative, to talk about storytelling with all her experience. I know she brings that into corporations. I know you've done work with Pixar, and I want to talk about storytelling, and Brian as well, through your lens. So maybe we just jump on in, and with your experience as an improviser, what does story mean to you? How do you define story?
How do I define story? Wow. You know, I tend to define the relationship that people have to story, because there's this assumption when people come to my classes that there's already an assumption that people know what story is. Mm-hmm. So I talk first about the relationship people have to story, in that story isn't just something that we make up to entertain ourselves, and story isn't just what we, do with our young to comfort them and put them into bed at night. Story is innately human, and it reflects the nature of the human brain. Our brains make stories whether we want them to or not.
Oh, that's a great point.
If you see someone that you know, and you're expecting them, and they walk in quickly, and they smash their keys down, and they drop their suitcase, you make a story about it.
Yeah.
And if it's someone you know well, actually, you've also got some conditioning that tells you, on a more animal level of your brain, you've got conditioning that tells you what the story is. So it could be a complete stranger. You're sitting in a gate at an airport, and someone you've never seen before walks up and finds a place to sit down and says "Wahoo!" and sits down and plugs in their technology. You make a story. You do it organically.
Yeah.
You do it in a nanosecond without any conscious consideration. And all it takes to activate that part of your mind is just getting out of your own head and stop worrying about your own neuroses for a moment, and look at other people and wonder what's going on with them. I mean, seriously, for me, it's just a switch. If I just think about others, even strangers, stories come up. You see a couple riding down the freeway in a car, a couple you've never seen before. The car, the people, the one who's driving, everything, it tells you a story. So that part of story is just innately human. Mm-hmm. and I think we compartmentalize just the word story, or the word narrative. We compartmentalize that and turn it into something that's intellectual or outside of ourselves, when it's actually within us, and it's operating all the time if we allow it. So yeah, I don't define story. Story defines me. How about that?
Oh. Tweetable moment.
Drop the mic. The interview is over.
Boom.
Yeah.
Well, so tell us, how does it come into play when you work with companies? Like, what do they struggle with?
Well, companies, there's a lot of levels, and you guys know this. I mean, Brian, you and Kathy, you're both marketing people, so you know this. Organizations tell their own stories, and they have stories they tell to the public. They have stories that they tell to their potential new hires. You get different stories when you go through orientation. You get different stories when you start working in a team. Some of those stories are intentional. It's like your new supervisor or manager might sit down with you and say, our team, it really gets along, we really collaborate, it's really important that everybody's comfortable here, and I want you to find your place here at fill in the blank company. So there's the stories that happen whether people are consciously thinking this is time for your orientation story. There is a story at almost every level. The way that stories can be damaging within organizations, within families, within relationships, within, you know, any kind of human grouping, tribe, whatever, is that people will tell backstories or shadow stories, and they'll take those interpretations that they have because they saw that guy slam down his keys or go woohoo and plug in his tech. They'll take those assumptions and stories that they make up, and they'll make those truths just because that's the way we are, and they'll start telling those stories. I mean, the classic place to tell them is the water cooler. It happens in hallways, in parking lots more and more, because in this high-tech world, it's harder and harder to think that you have privacy within the walls of an organization. So people start telling these stories outside, over a beer, after work, and those stories take on a truth of their own even when they are not true, even when they're not based in any fact, but they're based only on assumption. So we've got our intentional stories that are about, telling the world how we came to be, who we are, who we want to be, how we see ourselves in the future. And then we have the stories that just tend to follow us. Every event that takes place that comes to the attention of more than one person has more than two interpretations.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't think we've talked about this so much, Kathy, before this interview. Story as identity, and story as the identity of the community. Cool.
Well, yeah, and what struck me as you were talking, Rebecca, is so true. It's the emotional truth, how somebody feels. That's the truth to them, and whether there's an objective truth to that doesn't matter. The lens through which they're filtering their experience, that is their emotional truth. So the slamming of the keys that they witness might have an impact on somebody and make them feel stressed out. And then they're writing a truth and a narrative at a subconscious level because it's based off their own feelings, and feelings as a story. And that's really interesting.
Feelings inspire story in us organically, and it's I think it's part of how mankind has survived. We live and work in tribes, in groups, and we need to be able to read each other. We need to be able to make rapid assessments of the other to perceive if they are a threat or a friend. We need to be able to perceive if they are, if honestly, it comes down to survival. Are they safe?
Right.
Is what they give us safe? Don't take candy from strangers.
Right.
It's on a really primal level. We've developed that skill in order to survive, and it can create little problems. I've had this experience many times where someone else tells me how I feel. And, okay, so from your laugh, Brian, I gather you've had that experience?
I want to hear an example. I'm just laughing before I even hear the joke.
Well, I remember once in high school, I went into choir, and I got my music out of my box, and I stood in the stands in my spot, or sat and waited for everyone else to come in, and one of the kids walked by me and saw me and said, "You look angry."
Right.
And even at 16 years old, my face in repose was telling the angry story, even though I probably just woke up late, had to feed my little brother, had to ride my 10-speed across town, ran into school, didn't get to my first class on time. Even though I was not angry, it was other stuff was going on. My face told this guy angry. He says, "You look angry." It could just be a guy trying to make conversation. Now that's me making a story now from about why that happened. But in the moment, I was completely confused. I'm not angry.
Now I am.
I think it taught me to, that and other similar experiences at a young age teach us to make our face in repose when we're around others. to make that an intentional thing. And you see in public all the time people who wear masks that tell a story that keep people from talking to them. Stories that keep us safe in public or make people talk to you in a way you want to be spoken to. Like, I know a lot of really beautiful women who put on a face of disdain, who sort of are in public like this. So that no one goes to talk to them because they're beautiful, and that attracts people, and they don't want to be approached. So they put on a face of, disapproval or disdain, saying, please don't look at me or talk to me. I don't have time for you. So we even wear simple things like faces that say I'm angry. I have a friend I work with. He was my improv student for years, and then he started teaching himself. And his face in repose, absolutely, he looks judgmental and terrifying. So he tells his students when he introduces himself, you may notice that my face when I'm just listening looks angry. And then he goes like this. And then they go, yeah, ha, 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 ha. This is just me relaxed.
That's funny.
I don't know how I went off on that trail. It's that we, as human beings, we interpret and we make stories instantaneously. Now, these are not necessarily stories that are worthy of a feature film or a great novel. I mean, they're a lot of the time they're little tiny stories, but they give us hints about how to operate in relationship to others all the time in order to keep things safe or comfortable or keep ourselves the way we want to feel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, I can talk and talk and talk about
it's fascinating because I think it's a different perspective on narrative, which from the stage, and in fact, most of what I learned about narrative, I didn't learn in all the years in marketing. I actually learned through the improv stage. For me, because the emotional range or arc of a narrative is something that I learned in long form. And I'm curious, Rebecca, with your stage experience, your deep stage experience, what do you think makes a good story, and what maybe is missing, if anything, from a lot of corporate storytelling that you see?
Oh, okay. These are really big questions.
Yeah.
I'll answer the first one, and then you might need to ask me the second one again.
No problem. No problem.
Okay. So, what makes a good story in improvisation? Some of that has to do with the improvisation, and on a really fundamental, one of the things that makes a good story is that the elements of story are co-collaborative, so that there's a magical connection between the individuals that make the story. It's people contributing ideas together rather than one individual defining everything. Because if that's what you want to be doing, you should be writing screenplays or novels rather than being on stage making up story. But we'll take that as writ. It's improv, so people are collaborating. So we'll assume that's happening. We want to know the basic things that we need are context. In the film industry, they say this is in a world. In a world where. So we need all of that in a world stuff. We want it quickly. It's not mandatory in improv or any other storytelling that we get. Who is this story about? Where does this story take place? What are the concerns of the hero or the villain, if there is one? Like, what do they want? So Viola Spolin, the great improvisation teacher, she said we need who, what, where. What do you need for a story? You need who, what, where. And there are a lot of improv drills, I'm sure both of you have done them, where all you do is establish who, what, and where, and you learn to do that very quickly. You learn to just put who, what, and where out there as quickly as you can. And in film, that happens sometimes it's in the first 15 minutes. In the case of some filmmakers, it happens at the end. So stories can be told backward, and they don't tell you what the heck is going on till the end. And assuming the audience is compelled enough to stay there the entire time, they finally figure out who are these people and what's going on at the end of the film. But the who, what, and where in improv, we want to get it pretty clear pretty quickly, because otherwise the audience doesn't have context to be engaged, and the improvisers don't have the canvas to play on. Mm-hmm. And so that's Act One. In filmmaking, it's Act One. It's the yeah. And it doesn't mean the very first moment of the story is once upon a time there was a little boy and he loved. It could be, but it doesn't need to be. The story in so many Disney movies starts with backstory. Where you see Cinderella as a little baby, or no, it's not Cinderella. No, you see Sleeping Beauty as a little baby being cursed or blessed by fairies and witches and things. So it's like you get backstory first, or Bambi happy, and then so you get backstory, and then you get the who, what, and where. It's like this is the world. This is the world, and this is the rules of the world. And if you establish them right away, we all are on board with it, and it's awesome. So if this is a world in which human beings float, then woo, we're all on board with that. If this is a world in which people can talk underwater, oh, we're all on board with that. But if you establish a world that has the rules of physics that we follow, and suddenly somebody's talking underwater, that's one of the things that makes bad improv. So you could extrapolate out that if we create a who, what, and where, and people don't follow the like physical world rules of that universe, or the sociological rules of that universe, or just the logic of that universe, the story stops working.
Right.
Yeah.
So we want. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. And if you extrapolate to corporate storytelling, Rebecca, like what do you see that maybe from your lens? I mean, you do work with different companies, and there's the 22 rules for storytelling that Pixar famously put out. And I immediately thought of you because of the story spine that you in improv.
I must tell you, Pixar didn't put those rules out. Pixar never published those rules. In fact, this is a story I love to tell.
Let's hear it, because it's been affiliated with a writer from Pixar.
Yes, she was a story artist, and they're not really writers. They sort of are. She's a story artist. They draw panels to work out the moments that put together make the animation that make the story.
Yeah.
So they draw those little pictures.
Yeah.
Storyboarding.
It's a storyboarding.
Storyboard.
Storyboarding. And that's an important part of it.
Yeah, it's huge. But Emma Coates came to Pixar. She started taking improv classes. While she was doing that, she was also on a film and in the story department, and she was learning so much. She started tweeting about it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
One of her followers took the things that she said about story, turned it into a PDF document with images from Pixar without permission from Emma or Pixar. Emma never even knew this person.
Oh.
And so the backstory is, this is not a Pixar product.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing, because I've had people say, "Well, that story spine came from Pixar," and I'll say, "Well, no, actually, it came from improv, because I know Kid Adams," and I'll say, "No, it actually came from improv," and that's the backstory that when I tell people that part, which I do know, because that's where I learned that story spine, people go, "Really?" And I'm like, "It came from improv."
Yeah, it came from improvisation. It came from me to Emma to Twitter. Yeah. And someone attributed it.
And it sounds like it's a little random too. Like maybe not everything got tweeted out, right? Just a number of points that came to mind.
Just a number of points, and they're not in any order. And because of it, she hasn't been at Pixar for a long time. She makes her own films, but because of that, she's invited to do talks, and people want her to talk about the at Pixar and that isn't her talk.
That's
right.
That's not.
That's a story that somebody made up.
Boom! Boom! And because it's covered with Pixar imagery and it's got the Pixar name, it went viral. Because at Pixar, this is a Pixar quote: "A Pixar story is king." Yeah. A Pixar story is king. So the world just I don't know how to say it.
There's a credibility because it's a Pixar, and Pixar. Who does storytelling like Pixar? Few people. I mean, few companies do it like Pixar. So you're right. Yeah. I figured. I was saying to Brian. I said, well, if anyone's closest to Pixar storytelling, it's going to be Rebecca, and I think that's awesome. And I'm curious.
Well, I'm actually going to. Okay, I'm gonna actually give you guys a couple of names of people who are actually in the story department at Pixar for you to talk to.
Awesome. Okay,
great.
We'd love it.
So when we get done, I'll email you a couple names because that's far closer than I.
Yeah.
Well, hey, you know what? We're narrowing in on that circle of people in the know, and that's awesome. And,
That's
and I
good.
think few companies do it as well as Pixar. But if we talk about, just extrapolating kind of what you've been saying about story, which I think is really fascinating, about establishing rules and being really immersed in the who, what, where, and the story and the emotions and the characters and the relationships. What if anything, in your experience working with companies, what's the biggest problem with corporate storytelling today? What's missing?
Okay, I want to back up. I will come to this, I promise. I know that's why I'm here. But I want to back up because it's the who, what, and where, and then we need in film they call it the inciting incident.
Yeah.
Or we need something to change. So if there's a kid who loves baseball and every day he wants to play baseball, and in Ken Adams' story Spine, you've got the but one day. Some people have turned it into until one day or and one day. Because they think but is too negative, whatever. But it's once upon a time, every day, but one day, then something happens, and Keith Johnstone, my teacher, he calls it a tilt. So you have this established world, and then something takes place that changes it. But one day, they moved to a place where baseball was against the law. If that seems too far out, one day he broke his arm, and he couldn't play. Because of that, so you've got the inciting incident, and then you've got the fallout, the problem, what takes place because of the inciting incident.
Yes.
And in the story Spine, it's because of that he started playing with puzzles at home. Because of that, he learned he was a math whiz. Because of that, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Because of that, he ended up being a millionaire who takes who knows the odds on baseball and whatever. Something about betting. I don't know what that part is.
He goes to work with Brad Pitt in Moneyball.
There you go. Yeah. So there's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and in improv where things can go wrong is if you don't follow the rules of the world, if you don't listen to each other, and that's the biggest thing of all. If you don't listen to each other, that's the biggest problem, because everybody's on stage with a little bit of adrenaline, and adrenaline makes us spurt out nonsense and ideas and try to be clever. So if the world is established that it takes place in the 50s in somebody's backyard, but someone didn't hear 50s and they walk in with a cell phone, suddenly it's science fiction, or it's not the 50s anymore. So there's the listening is absolutely imperative. And then what we want as human beings is we want meaning, and meaning tends to happen because there's this inciting incident, there's the falling action, there's the problem that the hero goes after, or the heroes if it's about a village or a group of crazy kids who find a haunted house or whatever. So the heroes go through some kind of adventure, and then once they solve their problem, there's meaning, and if we put the meaning out there, it can feel a little heavy-handed, but our audience wants meaning. And then we have falling action, and I'll go this way because that makes more sense to you. Platform, inciting incident, problem, solution, falling action. Or in storytelling, they say beginning, middle, and end in third grade. In theater, in school, it was exposition, beginning, complication, problem, act 2, climax, solution, denouement. Falling action. So that was on a test. I had to write denouement.
Denouement.
So, all along the road, anything can go wrong in improv, which is part of why the miracle of telling stories as improvisers is so present. Because everyone's got to be paying attention. Everyone has to be present the entire time, and just that is worth working on your entire life. Just that little bit. Being attentive for 2 hours. So now I'll talk about business. In my experience, because of where I tend to work in business, so I'm not working with marketing ever, or hardly at all.
Which is probably a good thing.
I don't know. Well, I could use some, but where I tend to work in business is with individual contributors, whether they be leaders in an organization, or whether they're managing others, or they're they're individuals who are working in their pod, or contributing in their own way. What I work on is personal engagement, and it is never called that. Sometimes it's not called improv, but from my perspective, the breakdowns that happen in human organizations are because of engagement. If for some reason an individual disengages from, and I'm going to relate this to story directly.
Absolutely.
They disengage from the organization's story, then you've lost them to some extent. And they probably don't want to disengage, but they work their whole life. They work their whole life to get somewhere, and they get there, and it isn't what they thought it was going to be, right? This organization is a big old organization with a lot of backstory and history, and you grew up on it, and you get in the door, and it's just some jerk telling you what to do, and you've got this much, this much to do, and all of that creative energy that you've been encouraged for your entire life is not being activated. You're just pushing the go button again and again, or carrying something from here to there, whether that, it's usually virtual, but you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there can be disengagement from an organization when the organization's outwardly facing story is not what goes on inside. There can be disengagement when the inwardly facing story isn't really what you get, right? You're told, well, we're so grateful you came to this third interview, and we want to know what you'll bring to us, and you go through you clear all these hurdles, you get in the door, you go into your orientation, and then you get in the room with your team, and it isn't there, right? The magic of that come on in story, it's not there.
Yeah.
And so that disconnect between the stories and the reality can lose people, and it can lose them completely.
And that's actually really interesting because story is bigger than marketing. When Brian and I, talk about marketing, I think both of us have always, offline we've had many conversations about the fact that, look, story starts internally in a company. And if story is disconnected from the employees, there's no way that the outbound marketing stories are going to work for customers. So that, to me, that's further downstream. And if you go upstream in story is a bigger strategic thing for employees. It's so much bigger than marketing. And I never saw story as just the home of marketing. In fact, I don't think it is. I think it's I think it's the job of the company. It's everybody's a steward of the story, of the company's story. And your point is such an important one. It's like, what happens when the company story and the employee reality does not match?
Well, who's having that issue right now? Amazon. You've seen those things. I don't know what the truth of the situation is, but the rumors are that the stories aren't matching up, right?
Yeah. So that can create a disconnect, and you can lose individuals, and that's what I care about, is the individual engagement. And then of course, story. It's like we want everybody to have his own story or her own story. We want the person who. The first way that I started to directly bring story to business in a very conscious way was working with leaders on an elevator pitch. So, a big organization brings all of their leaders to a big conference, someplace on the planet, and everyone comes together, and they have this big meeting, and they learn all this great stuff, and there's leading thinkers, and they're all given books to read, and they're all treated well, and in a beautiful location. And then one of the things they need is when they go back to the organization and they get on the elevator with someone, and they've got that minute or 2 minutes, and somebody says, so what was that conference like? They can tell their story. Yeah. So learning to work with individuals on being able to tell a story about a specific event is absolutely, that's a great skill that I bring. And in those cases, we want people to be able to start with, we were in the most beautiful resort hotel I ever saw in my life, right? Rather than, okay, so it was pretty cool. Because when you've got 30 seconds or a minute, starting with, okay, so, wow, yeah, they lost my luggage, but I got it the very same day. That's not the story, right? It's like, identify the story you want to be heard. And even before that, identify what you want your story to do to your listener. Yeah. What is it you want your story to do? If we're all thinking about the impact we want from the stories that we tell, before we start telling our stories, we'll tell different stories. I'm a gigantic fan of the Moth. I'm a gigantic.
Yes.
When you said podcast, I'm like, yeah, I want to be on one of those. I listen to them all the time, and I love the Moth. I love TED Talks. I love Radio Lab. Too many to mention, but it's the story aspect that really engages me, and there's always this nugget of takeaway. And in these cases, it feels intentional, right? It feels like it's not just accidental that we got that message. Whether it's because at a Moth Story Slam they're given a theme to tell their story about, or because, or because, I don't know what. I don't know if they think in advance. I want people to know that you can survive being, treated poorly as a child. I don't think they're thinking that. I think it's more personal. It's I survived after being treated poorly as a child.
I can tell you from having done like the Risk one, when Risk came to Charleston, you get a little bit self-conscious. Like I want people to think my story was deep and that I learned something from it. So you do maybe you want to impress people a little bit. I think sometimes people do think about. I definitely need to know what the moral is, because if I didn't know what the moral was, then boy, I'm an idiot.
Right.
That's an interesting perspective. No, it's so true. And I've been to the Moth in Berkeley a couple of times, and the stories that are so polished, I think there was such an intentionality and purpose, and they knew what that was, and they polished that so well. And is your thought, Rebecca, in the work that you do and what you're seeing, do you think companies and executives are thinking more consciously about story, or is it still a little bit of an afterthought? What are you seeing?
I think that story has come up as one of the core competencies in leadership in organizations, and as soon as something is articulated as a skill that leaders need to have, then everybody wants it, because everybody wants to be a leader these days. I don't know if that's always been true, but it feels like everybody wants to be a leader. Yeah. And if they don't get it within a couple years, then they here in the Bay Area, they quit and do their own startup. But I see more and more of the people that I work with identify story as one of the reasons that they want me to come in. And more often than not, well, it depends on the month. Frequently, the word improv is not why they want me there. Right. They heard I was great at, fill in the blank, helping people tell stories or working on collaboration. But again and again, I'm in a situation where I'm introduced in an offsite or a retreat or a team building or something. I'm introduced, and they don't even give my title, which is Improv Lady. They don't even give it because they don't want to terrify the people who might not perceive themselves as being more shy, and it is terrifying. I mean, think about it. Before I was an actor, before I was an improviser, and to me, improv was terrifying. Like, oh God, we're going to do improv in rehearsal tonight, because it's totally unknown. And as an actor, there's nothing more controlled than being an actor, practically. Yeah. When you're on stage in your role, saying your lines, wearing your costume, arching your eyebrow at a specific moment, breathing at a specific moment, completely decided upon and controlled, and then you got to view it with spontaneity and life. That's not improv. Yeah. I mean, I'm an improviser because being perfect didn't make me as happy as the mistakes did. So, so I found my way to being an improviser. But we want people to be authentic, which improvisation helps with that. We want people to tell stories that engage us, and storytelling helps with that. So just the practical thing of what do you want your story to tell people. And I have used Ken Adams' story spine so many times in helping people tell their story, because commonly people go, okay, I've been thinking about the story that I want to tell, and they'll sit down or they'll stand up and they'll tell me their story, and it's this long, drawn out, circular, what people do,
Yeah.
I mean, it's natural. They get lost in an eddy of detail, or a description of an individual. They'll start telling what happened to that person down the line, and people get off track.
Yeah.
So being able to say, okay, what if you use this template, tell this story this way. I've also used the story spine in healing people. When someone is brokenhearted because they're leaving a job that they don't want to be leaving, to be able to tell the story of what has happened to them because they've been in that workplace in such a way that they see themselves not just in this moment of hurt, but they can see themselves in terms of the arc of their story at the company and the arc of their life. It can broaden your perspective about, it can give us distance from hurting moments.
Yeah.
I've used it in coaching to help people get back in touch with whatever calling it was that brought them into the work that they do, because as I'm sure you've seen, people have a great calling to do something and then they start doing the work and it's just not.
Yeah.
It's you get lost in the details and don't that thing that you were attracted to isn't there.
Yeah.
So getting back in touch with your calling so that you can find where that thing is on a day-to-day basis. And I've used it to help people solve problems, reverse engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Ken Adams, frequently, it's like if you start at the end of the story and go backward to the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can reverse engineer. You can find solutions to things, perhaps, or you can at least think about possible solutions and grapple with that. And telling stories backward is nearly impossible because our brains don't work that way, and it's really fun. And then also starting with where I am in the present and making up a possible story going into the future, so that I can give myself some perspective about my life.
Neat exercise.
So story is in all human organizations, and especially in the workplace, where so much of us, that's the place we spend time with other people.
Yeah.
We're at home or we're at work. So in the workplace, mastering your own stories. That should be the title of my book, Master Your Stories. Somebody probably wrote it. It's a good one, huh? Okay, so mastering your own stories so that you're telling them with intentionality is really powerful. When someone says to you, so how did you end up, in your doing the work you do? If you go, one thing led to another, and here I am, then it's not mastery. Yeah. If you start with, when I was a kid, the thing I loved to do more than anything else in the world was play pretend. And I exhausted my sister and my mother and all the kids in the neighborhood with playing pretend all the time. So as an adult, I wasn't going to be satisfied until I found a place where I could play pretend all the time. I'm an improviser.
I love that.
That's a different story than one thing led to another, and
you nailed it. I think for me, it's like there's nothing greater in terms of leadership skills than being able to tell stories, and being a great storyteller as a leader is what makes people listen and take notice, and these are really important. And I love the story spine because I've used it for a lot of things as well, and it really helps people think about their story in a full emotional arc, a full narrative. Yeah. And even though you need to, what if somebody told me, well, it's a little forced and structured, the once upon a time, but it is a universal, the way our brains work, and it helps people go to the next stage, the inciting incident, and then because of that, then what happened, and then what comes next, and then what comes next, and then, oh my gosh, because of that, and ever since that day, here's the happy ending, or here's the outcome, or the possibility. And there's nothing that moves people through. Or the tragic ending. And it's okay not to be, and I've had this discussion with people, it doesn't have to be a perfect happy ending. It's just to show change. Something has to change. And that's why I love that story spine.
If there's no change, there's no story.
Exactly. Right. That's what I've said. Yay.
Yeah.
It's true, and I think that's such a great tool for thinking through that narrative.
If you look at the big organizations that have really powerful corporate stories, big, like stories of founding or beginning, like Coca-Cola, or let's see, Coca-Cola or Disney or Apple. If you look at the stories of their beginnings, those are all really strong stories, and they're compelling, and they're like an invitation, and they permeate our lives. So I just
totally,
stories are very powerful.
Yeah.
So you work with Lucasfilm now, right?
I'm teaching a class there this fall. Yeah, I work with them once in a while. Yeah, okay. Why?
Well, the Star Wars geek in me is like, say something about Star Wars. Say something.
Oh my God, Brian, come on. A New Hope, or what I think of as the real first movie.
Yes.
Is a absolutely perfect example of the hero's journey.
Right.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
And you probably know the work of Joseph Campbell.
Yep.
And Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Yeah.
And I've heard tell that George Lucas, I've actually seen him talk about this, but George Lucas knew that hero's journey from Joseph Campbell's work. And that story is epic, and I love using it as an example when I'm talking about story with people who want to be improvisers. And one of the greatest distresses I experience, honestly, is when I'm working with someone and I say, let's just think about Star Wars, A New Hope.
Yeah.
And I'll say that, and then somebody will raise their hand and go, what if I haven't seen it? And
you're not fully human.
Can't. How can you? Oh, one of the things is, how can you be working in a film company and not have seen it? It's like, how can you be working here and you've never seen that?
Yes.
Or how can you be alive in this century and not have seen that movie? I mean, it freaks me out, because everyone had seen it for the first 20 years I was teaching improv, and then we got to a point where the people taking my adult improv classes were born after it was in the big theaters.
Yeah.
And it was something their parents had on the shelf in video, and they didn't see it. It's like, what? How can that even be? And so now for some of my classes, it's a prerequisite of the class that you watch that film, because I reference it so much, and it's got everything. It's got everything.
Yeah.
This is a world in which, and it's got the inciting incident, and he's lost, and this thing that was a skill that he had that he didn't even know was a skill becomes his heroic, saving skill or whatever. It's just. Yeah, it's so powerful. It's so profound, and I'm so eager to see the new films, and I can't imagine what they're going to be. I'm trying not to think about them, because
I just don't want to be disappointed. I'm just hoping
We're geeking out here. I am just having a geekgasm a minute here. This is awesome.
So, I think that. I think that if I have by the way, I learned something today. I learned that when people ask me to define story, I'll just say, I don't define story, story defines me. So thank you. You've given me a gift today.
That is pretty great line. Actually, that's a pretty...
I'm going to tweet it right now. But the other thing is that, story is on every level of an organization, and it's down to each individual. And one of the saddest things is when someone, for me, is when someone hears the organization's story and they say, "That's amazing. I wish I worked there."
Yeah.
Instead of knowing that's where I work. You get that? Someone works in an organization. I may have not framed that right, but you work for a company, you hear their story, and you go, that's not the way it is.
Totally, you framed it really well, and I think it's such an important concept, because again, everything flows upstream, and it starts with the story of the company and how employees are treated and what employees believe. And if they don't buy into that story, you can be darn sure the customers aren't going to get that story on the outside. I mean, that to me, that's where story is so much bigger. And I've never ever looked at story as a marketing function. I've always thought that is such a bigger strategic thing. Story is your GPS. It's what tells you who you are as a company and what you will do and what you won't do. And I think it's such an important thing. I mean, so much bigger than any of these individual pieces, you know. And so, yeah. Any final thoughts on story, Rebecca or Brian? Or there's some good nuggets of wisdom, I think, in today's call.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I've reached such a level of profound feeling that I don't feel the need to say anything more.
And should we say end scene? Because you cannot top that. I think that's. I think you leave on a high note, and that's a pretty darn Yeah,
it was great to talk to you. I'm a big Keith Johnstone fan too. I've read a couple of his books. Love that guy.
Yeah, me too.
Classes from him, but it was great to talk to you.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Absolutely.
I think he's in Norway right now.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, if I can be teaching in my 80s, I'll be the happiest creature on earth.
Nice.
I think you. Something tells me you will be. You've got all this energy. So, Rebecca Stockley from BATS Improv lady, and I love that you said, you know,
you just froze up.
It's not about. I love that you said it's not about improv. It's about story. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Rebecca and Brian.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Bye.